what's going on with the White House, because there's a lot of buzz about what is happening or what did happen to the East Wing of the White House. And certainly there's a lot of different feelings about that. I will give you that for sure. Let me go ahead and pull up, if I can here. I have a few different things open on my tabs as per usual. I wanted to show you what this looks like through a really great article that I was reading through Town and Country, which tends to be a really good magazine. I mean, I think about it as a little bit like old school magazine, but has been good in the past for some of these overviews of, kind of American history and in a cultural setting. So let me go ahead and pull this up so you can see a few different images here of the White House for those of you watching live. And for those of you listening, I'm going to it's a great article. It's definitely worth the read. If you have a second over coffee this week, I'll make sure it's in the show notes. So let's talk a little bit about the East Wing, because we don't seldom talk a lot about the East Wing. There's a lot of talk about the West Wing, where all, the big offices are, and a famous television show. East Wing is a little bit different. So when we think about the historic building of the White House, the original White House did not have kind of an east or west wing per se. It was just the White House. Under Thomas Jefferson, there were two terraces that were built, east and west terraces. And those were in place kind of through the 1800s. Then they were taken down. And then when Teddy Roosevelt came into office in the 1900s, he rebuilt some of these terraces. And this is how we get this east and west footprint. But it really wasn't until FDR when we see the East Wing rise as an actual structure like we're talking about it now. And so that was about 80 years ago. It was around the time of World War II. And I've said this once, I'll say it again, but a lot of the stories that we're talking about, whether it's foreign policy related or otherwise, we can kind of go back to this post-World War II period where the United States was blooming as a international superpower for the first time, militarily and otherwise, diplomatically. We suddenly were in a new position. And so a lot of the decisions that were made in that period are being challenged now about 80 years later. So this East Wing is really important because it wasn't just about office space. It also was about a place to put some of the security that this White House at the time, that Franklin Roosevelt felt that needed to be put in place. And underneath the East Wing is the bunker that exists for the president and his team to go into if there's a security situation. So underneath that ground is something that's very important for security, not necessarily aesthetics or function. So the East Wing, as we knew it, as some office spaces for different teams, including that of the First Lady. Eleanor Roosevelt was really big about securing her role in the White House, and first ladies have made a name for themselves in a few different ways. And this is where some of their offices were. There was also a fairly big room that could host about 200 people, but a lot of the state dinners that we've talked about, or state events where you have hundreds of people coming to the White House, were held under tents, and everything had to be brought in, because if you wanted a party for 500 people, 600 people, you would need a tent to be put up. You need to put down a floor. You have to bring in all the furniture. I mean, think about that. And it would be under a tent. So weather was a factor. Washington, D.C. is not the easiest place when it comes to weather. And that's the way it was done in the past. So yes, you had a bigger room in the East Wing, which is why when President Trump talked about using the East Wing and doing a renovation, I don't think it really dawned on anybody, me included, that he meant he was going to tear down the whole thing, which happened last week. So the demolition definitely caught people by surprise, because yes, he showed a plan for the East Wing, but the vision of, we're going to tear down everything and rebuild it wasn't exactly clear. And the White House will say, well, we talked about it. We talked about the renovations. I don't know if anyone really pictured in their mind what that would look like. And we can give everyone the benefit of the doubt on that. Maybe the press didn't ask the right questions. Maybe the White House didn't really want to talk about it. Maybe the plan changed. I mean, we know what remodeling and renovation is like. It can look a little different. Maybe it all changed. Who knows? But either way, this demolition took place, and there's a lot of strong opinions about it. It is important to note that the White House, along with several other buildings in DC, they're not underneath this umbrella of a certain type of preservation law that's required for others. And so there is some leniency for the president to make some calls. This is why we can see Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, talk about change, talk about changes that they made to the White House at different times. And this, we've seen presidents do this. President Truman, President Kennedy, we've seen a lot of changes made at the White House. It just hasn't been quite this visible. So the historic context is important. The East Wing does not date back to when John Adams moved into the White House. He was the very first president to live in the White House. It doesn't date back to that. The idea of this footprint of East and West Terrace does date back to Thomas Jefferson, but it was torn down during the 1800s. And what's emerged as the East Wing is really something that we've seen over the last 80 years. So just to give you a little bit of that, because it's emotional. You're thinking about the people's house and how do you feel about the White House? It could be really emotional to think about that. So I think that matters. How it matters, I don't know. But I was curious to find that out. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I would have thought that the White House was just the White House. It's been that way for 200 years. So here we are. Apparently, the White House says they do have to go through a review process of some sort for what they build, what is actually going to emerge on top of this, which is supposed to be a ballroom that fits at least 650 people, plus the office spaces that would be renovated that were there. So there would be some office spaces, but a much bigger location for big state events, which is true. Multiple administrations have struggled with this, of not having space to hold large events for visitors or otherwise. So that's also a fact. Here's an interesting fact I'm going to leave you with. David Axelrod, top advisor to President Obama, told NPR back in 2010 he got a call from President Trump saying, hey, you guys need a ballroom. And apparently David Axelrod passed Donald Trump, the businessman and television star at the time, not the presidential candidate, was years before that, passed him off to somebody else. I was like, yeah, and David Axelrod said something to the effect like, the tents don't really bother me, like, yeah, it's not really a big deal. Apparently President Trump said, you should come down to Mar-a-Lago. We got a good facility. I'm going to show you a ballroom. So this conversation predated even President Trump's first administration. He saw it as a problem. He is a real estate developer. And the way David Axelrod tells the story, apparently with a little bit of regret, saying, well, maybe if we gave him a little bit more attention to this request, maybe if we brought him in to the fold a little bit, you don't wake up and see the East Wing, leveled. I don't know. That sounds like an interesting conversation. I'd love to hear that from David Axelrod himself. What was that call like? What has that happened? Does he get a call about someone being like, let me build you a ballroom? So I thought I actually do think that's really important context for the president to be thinking about that, going back 15 years. So it was on his mind, folks. It was on his mind. And what the structure looks like from here is a big question. But with everything shut down, I do wonder a little bit about that. There seems to be the suggestion that the review board for any of these projects would be people appointed by the president. There's also another commission that maybe is not fully appointed by so it's a little bit of a gray area about how this all goes. In the small town that I live in, to do even very minor things to property that has historic value, you have to go through all of these steps. It is not easy. In fact, it's a deterrent to development, quite frankly, because you have to work within such strict bounds. I'm sure a lot of you live in areas that are like that. If you're in San Francisco or New York City, there's a question about historical preservation, depending on what buildings there are. I don't know how much that parallels what's happening at the White House right now. It's sort of fascinating, sort of a fascinating thing to know about. So let's see what you guys are saying on the live chat. As someone that works in the construction industry, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with what's happening, but sometimes it's just less expensive to tear down and rebuild, especially with all the new technology. So the question I have about with that, thank you for that comment, is about the security part. Caroline Levitt was asked this question, the press secretary, what about the bunker? And apparently she said, well, that's involved in the plan, but that's not very specific. So I would assume, it's never safe to assume, as you know, that the bunker is still operable while this is happening, because otherwise you don't have one for the president. But is there another reason here about security that would make sense? I'm not offering this as an to explain away what the president is doing. I'm just curious about it. So Yes, and Jan asked this question, did they need to get the review and approval? Apparently not for not demolition, Jan. That's what the White House says. They didn't have to do it, and now they're like, it's over. And this is the way the White House moves. They move decisively, they do things, and they say, well, you could challenge it, but they're already moving. What some supporters will view as decisive leadership, others will view as bullying and chaotic. And you see that sort of in hypercolor here when we're talking about this particular issue, because the East Wing is gone. So whoever was going to challenge it, it's not like can't come back, and it was gone like that. So yes, Tara's saying, I live in Boston. Do you know how much red tape we need to go through to make any changes to a building? This is what I'm talking about, Tara. I don't think it does exist in Washington, D.C. proper if you're part of the city, but the White House is in this different nook of law. And I don't know if any of us really know enough about it because we've never seen anything done like this. So I don't know. I don't know, y'all. I would have liked to know, like, okay, the roof was leaking and the electricity was bad. It was cold in the winter and there wasn't any insulation. And I mean, we all watch too much HGTV. We know who we want up there. We want to see the HGTV host that we love, like doing like a walkthrough. Oh, yeah, that wall needs to come down. Look at that. That's hanging off the wall. We're going to need to fix that. Oh, this is going to be we got to take down that wall. It's not good. Look at this. The floor needs to go. So anyhow, it's yeah, this is I know it's emotional. I think the context is interesting. I'll keep you posted about that. Um I know it's hard to see that sort of project, the multi-million-dollar project. It just sort of happens during a government shutdown when a lot of people are not able to collect a paycheck, and there's not the normal people like group in Washington D.C., whether lawmakers or federal workers, that would be around to step in front of a microphone and say they don't like it. So also the timing of it, I find very interesting. Advantageous perhaps to the White House, or a disadvantage because it allowed the press to totally focus on it because nobody else was in town. So it could kind of slice both ways.